So because of Kong Skull Island, a lot of people have been talking about Godzilla these days. Because King Kong and Godzilla now inhabit the same universe, Kong Skull Island apparently has some kind of scene, some kind of information that leads up to Godzilla 2 that's going to like spread out this legendary monsterverse, and of course it sets up Godzilla versus King Kong in 2020. And whenever a new movie comes out, a lot of the fans of these kinds of franchises, they come out of the woodwork, they post articles, and they get into very interesting, very heated debates on how does this work, how does that work. And since I've been frequenting spacebattles.com, a place that's very much a really good place for really intelligent conversation for fans and non-fans of this material to jump into, I started seeing things about not just Kong Skull Island. There's certain things that have made me personally more interested to see the movie beyond the fact that it's done by Larry Fong, and Larry Fong is he's an insane cinematographer. He's probably one of the best the industry has. And another movie that they got me interested in was Shin Godzilla. And Shin Godzilla is basically Toho's, or rather Japan's, kind of answer to Godzilla 2014. When that movie came out, it was a decent financial success. It got okay reviews. But once I heard that it doesn't really live up to what the trailers sold it as, that it's kind of really self-important, that it isn't as smart as it thinks it is, and it's not really kind of a continuation of the original movie, which was supposedly a really serious film, I just kind of lost interest in it. But then when Shin Godzilla came out, or Godzilla Resurgence, I started reading about these various tidbits about the film, what it's about, what it's doing. And as I was reading this stuff and I was kind of asking people around, I got really interested in this film. And so this is very much the first Godzilla movie I've ever seen. And as I did more research myself, I found out that Hideaki Anno did the movie. And Hideaki Anno is kind of a big deal in the anime space because he did Neon Genesis Evangelion. And so, because that's a really iconic anime that really deals with kind of like the human condition, about humanity, coming together to fight this otherworldly beast through extraordinary means, I thought that was a really interesting creative choice, and I wanted to see how he would translate his experience with anime, his writing for anime, into kind of a live-action flick. And I have to say, the result is something really, really interesting, and I wasn't expecting to like this movie as much as I have. I'd go so far as to say that this is probably, once again, one of the best movies I've seen in the past few years. And that's no mean feat, because recently I've seen John Wick 2, I've seen Lego Batman and Logan, and the fact that this flick can really stand up to them for its own merits is a really big compliment I can give to the film. The premise is actually very simple. It's pretty much what you'd expect. It's set in Tokyo, it's set in Japan, and then Godzilla shows up, and Godzilla, being a monster, he fucks shit up, and Japan has to unite to stop him. And it's really the political commentary, the political and social commentary that's used throughout the human characters and how they parallel with Godzilla that make this film interesting. The whole movie has this idea where Japan is very much defined by the post-World War II experience, where even now, 70 years later, the things that happened in World War II, especially the bombs dropping, has really defined the nation. It's defined the way they live, how they think about things, how they're very kind of subservient to the United States. And because they live in this perpetual shadow, they can never truly gain true autonomy. They're always kind of afraid of doing their own thing, and throughout much of the movie they have to defer to the United States' authority on matters. They have to let the USA do what they want, even if they don't agree with it, and they constantly have to seek outside help from countries like France and other peoples from the United Nations to get things done their way. And so it's really interesting to see a country that is lauded as being so highly advanced, a country that has really rebuilt itself, still be so subservient to another power, which makes sense, but it also is really surprising to watch, given the fact, what Japan has managed to make of itself. And this shadow of World War II is something that looms over Godzilla 2. Godzilla, though his origins are never completely specified, it is implied that mankind's obsession from World War II throughout the Cold War with using nuclear waste is what helps create Godzilla. And when Godzilla finally reaches a state where he is a threat to mankind and he has to be stopped, you have this really interesting situation where you have these two shadows of World War II, of Japanese society, Godzilla and Japan itself, needing to battle one another to survive, and whoever wins at the end is going to evolve into something hopefully better. And evolution is a really apt way to say it, because Godzilla throughout this film is not always, well, Godzilla. There's this really big thing going on where he evolves through various stages. The very first stage we see him in, he's almost like a worm. He doesn't even look like himself. This big-ass worm that just rises out of the ocean and just kind of freaks the shit out of people. And then as the movie progresses, this thing has big spurts of evolution where they even comment this in the film itself, where Godzilla is constantly evolving. So in the span of a few hours, he goes through an evolution that would take any other species on the planet millions upon millions of years. And so he goes from like this worm to this half-crawling lizard, and then he becomes the design you see in the trailers and the posters, this kind of charred, nightmarish monster who's the tallest Godzilla version we've ever gotten, and who has some really insane abilities. And Godzilla in this film is not treated as kind of a heroic character like he is sometimes in the other movies, or some kind of quasi-defender of mankind. He isn't even much of an animal. There's something really, really wrong with this thing. The beady eyes, the charred corpse, the forms that I mentioned beforehand where he's like this half-crawling lizard. There's a really disturbing scene where he's like crawling through the streets. He's trying to like get on his feet. And as he's crawling through the streets, like his neck is constantly bleeding. It's releasing like gushes, like gallons upon gallons of blood everywhere. And the way this thing fires its atomic breath, it like splits its lower jaw in half, and its head just does like this really, goes to a really disturbing angle. And when he fires the atomic blast, because you see it coming from like this fucking split-jawed monster thing with burned flesh, it's just really, really freaky. And throughout the entire movie, they do a really good job of making Godzilla an effective force of nature. And like I said, he doesn't really have much personality, and there's something not really right with him. And I think the fact that they use a suit, I believe it is a suit, the fact that he doesn't look right, that he doesn't look entirely natural, makes him look even worse, because there are a lot of moments where Godzilla is, being attacked, or where he's attacking something else, and his movements never look completely natural, and that always makes him look wrong. And you get the distinct impression that this thing is in perpetual misery, and the fact that we're attacking it, even though it is in self-defense, that we are attacking it, that we are hurting it, is just making it more and more angry. And we're also helping it evolve, because some of the things the military does to Godzilla in this film do make him evolve in response to us, so he can get better at combating us. And so Japan has to get better at combating him with all these new abilities he has in mind. And like I said, these two things, the Japanese nation and Godzilla, really complement one another, and they really parallel each other, because they're both, like I said, products of World War II, and they're fighting one another to see who will evolve first and who will evolve better so that they can survive this conflict. And because you have to represent an entire nation fighting against this singular monster who doesn't really have much of a personality, there isn't really a central character to the movie. You have a lot of different characters from different backgrounds. You have the Prime Minister, you have the Secretary of State, you have this assistant, you have biologists, you have computer nerds, they even call them that. You have a lot of different characters who none of them are the central character. There's no one guy who's like the beacon of all-encompassing hope, the guy who goes to everybody else and tells them, you got to do this or we're all going to die. there are a lot of characters who are basically representing the nation of Japan through their various jobs, through the various, let's call them factions they belong to. And they're all big representations of Japan because every one of them is an important cog in the overall machine that does Japan. And the whole movie's point is that Japan manages to win because they're not a singular entity. They're not just one thing fighting everything else. They are a collection of people of various different backgrounds, various different experiences and personalities who all come together to contribute to saving mankind, more or less. And it's kind of like the Star Trek thing where eventually our society just evolves to the point where you just have this very diverse cast of people from both humanity and other species who just come together in the advancement of society. And it's kind of Star Trek-y like that. There's no American bullshit here where there's where the protagonist has like a boss who's an asshole for no good reason, even though his dickishness is needlessly complicating things. There's no bullshit like that. There's no character who just acts like an obsessive antagonistic douchebag for no reason. Everybody in this movie is really smart, they're really reasonable, and when they do lose their cool, they get it back and they apologize, and then they just get back to doing the job. And so there's none of that American bullshit where characters exist just to cause stupid, pointless conflict when the fate of mankind is at stake, and we just don't have time for that stupid bullshit. The military is a really good example of that. There's no stupid Thunderbolt Ross type character who's just gun-ho about everything, whose first and only plan is fucking nuke it. Well, the United States kind of fills that role, and that's another bit of interesting commentary where the United States, when they find out about Godzilla and they find out that Japan can't stop him, they're just like, blow it up and, just fucking nuke Tokyo and that's going to be it. And because, like I said, Japan is this very subservient nation to the United States because they still feel the shame of World War II, for a lot of the final act, they're fully committed to doing that, even though the thought of a third nuclear bomb dropping on their country completely horrifies them, even if it could potentially save their lives. And there's a really great line of dialogue about the whole American thing where you have where a couple of the characters are discussing, how can the United States get away with this? And then one of the characters says, he says that if Godzilla showed up in New York, they would nuke New York if that was the only way to stop him. And I can 100% believe that. I can believe that the United States would actually drop a nuclear warhead in a place like New York fucking City if it meant beating Godzilla. And it really does show you kind of the cultural differences in the way Japan manages to beat Godzilla versus how the Americans would do it. The Americans would rely, exclusively on military power, just keep throwing the biggest, most explosive shit at this thing you can, as long as you can, as much as you can, until it hopefully fucking dies, and if it doesn't, run for the hills. Japan is a bit smarter than that, and I really like the way they approach defeating Godzilla. It's not about might versus might, it's about using their collective brain power, their collective experiences, their knowledge as an entire nation being united to find a clever way to beat the monster. And like I said, some people are not going to like the fact that this movie doesn't really have a central protagonist. It just has a lot of characters doing a lot of things that sometimes together, sometimes apart, that contribute to the overall theme of Japan versus Godzilla, who's going to evolve to become better than the shadow of World War II that hangs over both of them. And that's kind of and a lot of people, like I said, are not going to like that approach. And like I said earlier on, the way I described that scene about how America would nuke New York City, the fact that I can't even remember the characters' names shows you that they aren't very much developed. There's no arc in this movie. The only thing resembling an arc is the fact that Japan as a whole nation is through their victory over Godzilla, and I'm not really spoiling the movie because they're going to beat Godzilla, so it's not really a spoiler, but through their victory against Godzilla, they have a new way. They can function with more autonomy on the global scale. It's their plan that won. It was their idea. It wasn't France. It wasn't the United Nations. It wasn't the United States. Japan managed to beat Godzilla largely through their own help, but of course they did have help from, outside countries. And because Japan has kind of managed to get out of World War II shadow, where they feel like this sense of responsibility towards themselves, this new sense of autonomy they haven't felt for decades upon decades, it's a really interesting examination of Japanese society. And the fact that the film makes you really invested in that shit, despite me not really knowing much about Japan and not knowing much about their history, is a testament to really good writing. But that being said, because there is no central protagonist, because there is no personal character arc for one guy who's changed by Godzilla's presence and shit, that's going to throw people off. A lot of people are going to find the film perhaps too jumpy. And because this movie is representing an entire nation through, several cogs who aren't so much as characters as they are kind of like devices to kind of portray the entire country, a lot of people are going to think that the movie is too talky, because a lot of this movie is just people going around boardrooms and talking about things and planning things and analyzing data and figuring stuff out. And a lot of people are going to find that really boring. A lot of people are going to find the fact that there isn't much action really boring. But I personally found the whole social and political commentary on Japan and Japan's relationship with the world around them, and how Godzilla is sort of challenging them all to see how they're going to win, how are they going to evolve and get better to get out of the shadow of World War II, or is that shadow personified through Godzilla going to destroy them all? And there are other issues. The cut I've seen of the movie is an hour and 40 minutes long, and the actual cut of the movie is 2 hours long. And I have on good authority that 20 minutes of the film were cut out of international releases because the first 20 minutes were really jokey. They have some heavy Japanese humor that international audiences wouldn't understand. And I can kind of see why they cut that out, but it makes the editing of the first 10 minutes really fucking atrocious. It's not like Suicide Squad, where the frenetic editing can be kind of a stylistic thing, where because everybody is crazy and a lot of crazy shit is happening in those first introductory minutes of Suicide Squad, you can let the crazy editing go because everybody is crazy in the film itself. There's nothing like that. They don't use the clever editing to punctuate the action to show the craziness of Godzilla's destruction. It's just really awkward editing. And there were several scenes where you have this big, booming, really good orchestral score that sets up the mood well, and then there's an abrupt cut to something else, and you're just like, wow, either the people who did this movie have no fucking experience making a live-action movie, which isn't the case if you see the rest of the flick, or somebody in the editing room really fucked this up hard. And I actually do hope we get a proper Blu-ray release soon so that I can see the movie in its full glory. So yeah, if you're somebody who just wants to see Godzilla destroy everything, a big action slugfest, you're not gonna like this movie. If you're someone who needs a central protagonist like you do in a lot of traditional storylines, instead of several protagonists acting as ciphers for an entire nation, you're probably not going to like this flick. But if you're someone who really likes examinations of foreign countries, their cultures, their mindsets, and how they can approach a problem and get out of the sins of their own past and maybe evolve better through battling a big threat like Godzilla, I think you're going to have a really good time with this flick. And like I said, this is a movie that I've seen after watching Logan, after Lego Batman, after John Wick, 3 really, really, really fucking great movies. And the fact that this thing managed to impress me as much as it did, considering the fact that it had a nothing budget and some of the CGI being wonky, and the fact that it is a lot of people just going around boardrooms and just talking about stuff, the fact that it was able to leave such an impression on me is a testament to this film. It's really something special. I feel like you should definitely check it out. And I can see myself getting really interested in the kaiju genre now if I can get my hands on more of them like this. But I have on good authority that besides the very first Godzilla movie from 1954, a lot of the other ones aren't really like this, which is kind of a shame, but there is going to be another one in 2017 by Gen Urobuchi. He did Fate Zero, which is one of my favorite anime of all time. It's the first animated Godzilla flick, and if it's half as good as this, damn, this is going to be the year where I might become a Godzilla tard. So what did you guys think about Shin Godzilla or Godzilla Resurgence? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Did you find it boring? Did you like the politics of it? Do you not like the stylistic choices that were done in the film? This is certainly not the kind of Godzilla movie I could possibly make, or make it like this, or would even make it like this. But just because the movie does something I don't stylistically would or could do doesn't make it bad. So do you guys agree with that? Do you think they maybe should have done it in a completely different way? Or do you just think that Hideaki Anno went full-on pretentious retard the way I hear he could sometimes do with Neon Genesis Evangelion?